I grew up in a small rural town in Montana, where winters were brutal and the nights stretched on for what felt like forever. Our house sat on a large property, with empty fields stretching out behind us, bordered only by a thin line of trees in the distance. It was the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors and everyone knew each other. This happened when I was about 17. It was late October, just after sunset, and my parents had gone into town for dinner, leaving me home alone. I didn't mind, I liked the quiet. I made myself something to eat, turned on a movie, and settled in for a relaxing evening. Around 9:30 p.m., I got up to grab a drink from the kitchen and happened to glance out the back window. That's when I saw him. A man was standing in the middle of our field. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was dark, and the only light came from the full moon overhead. I squinted, trying to make out any details. He was just standing there, perfectly still, facing my house. He wasn't close, maybe 50 yards away, but something about him felt wrong. He was too rigid, too silent that I stared for a few more seconds, expecting him to move, to shift, to do anything. But he didn't, just stood there, his posture unnaturally stiff. I tried to convince myself it was just a farmer checking his land or some hunter who got lost. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. No one should have been out there. I told myself I was being paranoid and turned away from the window. I grabbed my drink and went back to the living room, determined to ignore whatever I had just seen. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, walked back to the kitchen window, and shined the beam toward the field. He was gone. The field was emptied. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, relieved but still unsettled. Maybe he'd just walked off. Maybe it was never a person at all, just a trick of the light, a shadow from the trees trying to shake the unease. I sat back down on the couch. Minutes passed. Then, out of nowhere, came a sound that made my blood run cold. At a slow, deliberate knock on the back door. I froze. 0.3 knocks. Steady, unhurried. The back door didn't have a peephole and the curtains were drawn. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. I crept toward the door, barely breathing, and ever so carefully lifted the edge of the curtain. There was no one there. The porch light was on, casting a dull yellow glow over the empty deck. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the trees, but the night was still, heavy with something I couldn't name. I stood there for a long moment, my heart hammering. Then, just as I was about to let the curtain fall, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Out in the field. He was back, closer this time. Not 50 yards away anymore. More like 20. He was still standing in that same unnatural posture, still watching. Only now, his head was tilted ever so slightly to the side. I backed away from the door, my entire body screaming at me to lock everything, to call someone, anyone. But my phone was charging in my room, and I wasn't about to turn my back on whatever this was. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he moved. Not in a normal way. Not like a person taking a step forward. It was like he glitched, like one moment he was 20 yards away, and the next he was 15, then 10. Too fast, too impossible. That was all it took. I sprinted to my room, grabbed my phone, and called my dad. My voice was shaking as I told him what was happening. He didn't ask questions. Just said he and my mom were on their way. I stayed locked in my room until I saw the headlights of their truck pulling up the driveway. When my dad searched the yard with a flashlight, there was nothing there. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been on our property. Just the empty fields stretching out into the night. After that, I never saw him again. But I never forgot him either. And to this day, I don't look out that window after dark. A few days passed after that night, but the fear never really left me. Every time I glanced out the back window, I half expected to see him standing there again, closer than before. I kept the curtains drawn, and at night, I locked every door and window twice. For a while, nothing happened. No strange knocks, no shadows in the field. I started to convince myself that maybe it had all been in my head, some trick of the moonlight and my own paranoia. Then, exactly 1 week later, I woke up to a sound that turned my stomach to ice. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the door this time, on my bedroom window. I shot up in bed, my breath caught in my throat. My room was on the second floor. There was no way someone could be outside my window. But the sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, almost playful. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I did something I regret to this day. I looked, just a quick glance, barely turning my head toward the window. And he was there, not standing in the field, not on the ground, but pressed against the glass. His face was inches from mine, separated only by that thin pane of glass. His eyes were hollow, dark pits. His skin was stretched too tight. His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. And his head was tilted too far to the side. Like his neck was broken. I didn't scream. Couldn't. My body refused to make a sound. Then, as if he knew I was frozen in terror, his mouth twitched, and he spoke just 3 words. Not yet ready. Then, in an instant, he was gone. No fading, no running. Just gone. My parents found me the next morning, curled up on the floor, clutching my blanket, shaking so hard I couldn't speak. They didn't believe me. They said it must have been a nightmare, that there was no way anyone could have been outside my window. But I know what I saw, and the worst part, the next night I found something outside. Right beneath my window, in the soft dirt. A single footprint, too deep, too large, and facing the wrong way. Like whatever had been there hadn't walked away. It had crawled. And I don't think it was human. I don't think it ever was. This happened to me in 2018, when I was living alone in a small rental house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The area was mostly safe, and my landlord was an old friend of my father, so I had no reason to feel uneasy about staying there. The house had a backyard with a wooden fence, and beyond it was a dense patch of trees leading to a small creek. At the time, I was working late shifts at a local diner, meaning I often got home around 2 or 3 in the morning. Most nights, I would make myself a quick snack, scroll through my phone for a bit, and go to bed. But one particular night, something happened that changed the way I lived forever. That night, I got home as usual and locked the front door behind me. I was exhausted from work, so I went straight to the kitchen to make something to eat. As I waited for my food to heat up, I heard something strange, a faint rustling noise coming from the backyard. I stopped what I was doing and listened carefully. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but then the noise changed. It wasn't just rustling. It sounded like soft footsteps in the dry grass. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I walked over to the back door, which had a small window with a curtain. Slowly, I pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. The backyard was dark, except for the weak light coming from my kitchen window. And then I saw it. A man was standing just beyond the fence, facing my house. He wasn't moving, just standing there, completely still, staring. I couldn't make out his face, but I could see the outline of his body in the dim light. My heart started pounding. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that maybe it was just a neighbor or someone who had wandered onto the wrong property. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Then, without warning, the man took a step forward and gripped the top of the wooden fence. I backed away from the door immediately, my hands shaking. I reached for my phone to call the police, but just as I was about to dial, I heard a loud thud, He had climbed over the fence at that moment. I panicked. I ran to the front of the house and checked the door locked. I double-checked the windows, all locked. I turned off the kitchen light, hoping that maybe, if he thought I wasn't awake, he would leave. The next few moments felt like an eternity. I stood there in the dark, my back pressed against the wall, barely breathing. I could hear movement outside, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the house. Then, a quiet tap, tap, tap on the back door that I didn't move. Another tap, tap, tap. Then silence that I stayed there for what felt like hours, but in reality it was only a few minutes. Eventually, I heard the sound of footsteps retreating, followed by the unmistakable noise of someone climbing back over the fence. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, when the sun was up, I finally built up the courage to check the backyard. The only sign that someone had been there was a single footprint in the dirt near the fence. I reported it to the police, but without any real evidence or security footage, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I get a security camera and stronger locks, which I did immediately. That I never saw the man again. But every night after that, when I came home from work, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching, waiting. After that terrifying night, I did everything I could to feel safe again. I installed security cameras around the house, upgraded my locks, and even got motion sensor lights for the backyard. For the next few weeks, I constantly checked my cameras and windows, but nothing happened. Slowly, I started convincing myself that it was just a one-time event. Maybe a homeless person passing through or a random trespasser. But I was wrong. One evening, about a month later, I got home from work around 2:30 a.m. as usual. I parked my car in the driveway and glanced toward the house. The front porch light was on, and everything looked normal. But as I walked up to my door, I had this eerie feeling, like someone was watching me. I shook it off, quickly unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The moment I shut the door behind me, my phone vibrated. I pulled it out and saw a notification from my security camera app. Motion detected, backyard camera. My stomach dropped and I stood frozen in my doorway for a few seconds, then slowly opened the app to check the live feed at first. I didn't see anything, just my backyard, still and empty. But then, in the corner of the screen, I noticed something off. The wooden gate at the far end of the yard, it was open. That gate had been locked. I was sure of it. I switched to my second camera, the one facing the side of the house. My heart started pounding as I saw it. The same man. That he was standing near the side of my house, partially hidden in the shadows. His face turned toward my bedroom window. That I felt sick. He had come back. And this time he was closer. That I immediately called the police, my hands shaking as I explained the situation. They told me to stay inside, lock my doors, and wait for officers to arrive. I moved away from the windows, turned off all the lights, and crouched down near the front door, my ears straining for any sound outside. And then, thud! A heavy noise came from the side of the house. That I covered my mouth to keep from making a sound. My camera feed was still open on my phone, but the screen had gone dark to save battery. I hesitated for a second, then tapped it to refresh the feed. The man was gone. I didn't know where he was anymore. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. My mind raced with terrifying thoughts. Was he trying to break in? Was he hiding, waiting for me to let my guard down? Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw flashing red and blue lights outside. The police had arrived. I ran to the door and let them in, explaining everything as quickly as I could. They checked the entire property, even the wooded area behind my fence, but there was no sign of him. The only thing they found was deep footprints in the dirt near my window, like he had been standing there for a long time, watching. After that night, I couldn't stay there anymore. I moved out a few weeks later, breaking my lease early. My landlord understood. He had seen the police reports and didn't even argue about it. This day, I still wonder what that man wanted. why he kept coming back. And the scariest part, I'll never know.